Today, I'd like to talk to you about the exhauster used on Gardner engines. Now, the exhauster helps us with braking systems. So if your primary interest is in marine engines or in gensets, then you can bail out now. This is not going to be of any interest to you. In fact, I will confess, I'm only shooting this video because I myself find it quite an interesting subject. The exhauster on the Gardner engine is used, as I said, to help us with braking systems. It helps us to increase the hydraulic pressure within the braking system and bring about more effective braking. But before we go on to the subject itself, let's consider the topic of pressure. We might understand this or we might not. What exactly is pressure? What's going on there? Okay, very simple approach. Pressure is force divided by area. There's a force on the palm of my hand. I push my finger in, I'm exerting a force on the palm of my hand. The pressure is determined by the area of my finger here. Obviously, if I press in with my finger and then press in with my thumb, the thumb is a bigger area, so it exerts less pressure on the palm of my hand. We can take it to another extreme. Here we have a Stanley knife. The area at the point of the Stanley knife, you'll agree, is very small. I can exert quite a moderate amount of force on the Stanley knife here into the bench, and the Stanley knife will force itself. The pressure at the point of the blade here will cause the Stanley knife to be forced down into the timber. Another extreme example is if I took that same point here and pressed it against the jugular vein on my wrist and push it in, the pressure will be such that I'm going to have a hell of a mess. You get my point. Pressure is determined by force divided by area. The smaller the area, the bigger the pressure for a given force. So let's consider that now in some detail. Here we have two pistons. On the left, we've got quite a small piston, and on the right, a relatively large one. Their cylinders are connected together by that pipe you can see there. Now, it's an extraordinary phenomena of any fluid that the pressure in the fluid, be it a liquid or a gas, is the same at every point. So the pressure on the left-hand cylinder there is the same as the pressure in the right-hand cylinder. Now remember what we said earlier, pressure equals force over area. So the pressure in this system, which is the same at every point, is determined by the force F, that small f that you can see there, divided by the area of the small cylinder. Now that small cylinder could in effect be a cylinder connected to the brake pedal in your vehicle. So whenever you put your foot on the brake pedal, you exert a force on that piston, which brings about a pressure in the whole system, including the pipe and including the big slave cylinder on the right there. I hope that's clear. But if pressure equals force over area, then force equals pressure times area. We can see from this that the force coming out of the right-hand cylinder, the slave cylinder, will be much higher than the force coming out of the left-hand cylinder. Now the movement on the left-hand cylinder will be more than the one on the right hand, but that doesn't matter. In the braking system, we only need a small movement in the brake pads or in the discs or whatever to bring about braking. So this will be all very well. We can ease our braking problem here by using a little simple hydraulic system like that. If only life was so simple. The problem is that that cylinder on the right hand needs to be so big that it's just too big to fit down in beside where the wheel drum is. We've got to try and work out some sort of addition to this system which will help us without having a big cylinder there at the sleeve. And this is where engineers have come up with the idea of a vacuum braking system. Now, this was first developed, as far as I know, in the railway industry, where they had the problem of trying to brake a large number of carriages along a whole rail system. And that's where they were able to employ the exhauster. Here we've got a system using a diaphragm. That curved line there is a strong rubber diaphragm. So you can see that if my brake pedal on the left pushes in and pushes that diaphragm to the right, it will cause that red piston there to move inside the master cylinder and exert hydraulic pressure to the sleeve. Now that's all very well, but that's not really any help to us. We need a bit of assistance from somewhere, and we get that assistance by employing the exhauster. What we do is we connect a pipe from the exhauster to the right hand side of that diaphragm. In effect, the exhauster sucks the air out of the right hand side. It creates a vacuum in there which helps the diaphragm to move to the right. It's really quite effective, and that means that a lot of pressure will be developed in the master cylinder and then in the slave cylinder. Now, in a petrol engine, we don't need an exhauster, because whenever you go to brake your car, you lift your foot off the throttle, and this creates a vacuum in the inlet manifold, and it's that vacuum that's used to help with the braking. You create a vacuum because there's a butterfly valve in the inlet manifold just beside the carburetor. So whenever you lift your foot off the throttle, you actually close that butterfly valve, and that's what creates the vacuum. Let's take a look at that now, just on our forklift. Now, this is actually a carburetor on our gas forklift. You can see as I operate the throttle, you can see that valve there moving. Now, whenever the valve is in that position, it's fully open, so the engine is going flat out. And in that position, where it is now, the butterfly valve is closed. So if you can imagine yourself driving along in your car and you lift your foot off the throttle, it's as if the engine does a great big, it does a gasp for air. And that's what causes the vacuum. And here we have an actual exhauster on a 4LK. This is a 4LK core engine that we have sitting in the workshop. You would think by the closeness of that pulley that it's actually pulley driven, but it isn't. It's driven by a crank and a crankshaft on the end of the camshaft. I can't actually show you that at the minute, but you can imagine in behind that cover there's a crank going up and down, and inside the exhauster there's a piston, and as the piston moves down, it creates a vacuum in the top, which is fed then to the diaphragm for the brakes. When we installed a 4LK in a Land Rover Series 2, you'll have seen that in our other YouTube videos. That engine didn't have an exhauster on it, so we had to use an electric vacuum pump. You can see it here. You can also see the heavy black pipe connecting the vacuum pump to the diaphragm up at the top. And you can see the oil reservoir there and the master cylinder. You'll see there a little black relay, number 87. When you put your foot on the brake pedal, that relay is activated and it pulls on that vacuum pump. It all works very well. Okay, that's exhausters. Now, the limitation in the exhauster is that the vacuum created cannot, that the vacuum created is determined actually by the atmospheric pressure, by the ordinary geographical atmospheric pressure that we have surrounding us. That's its limitation. And it actually depends on the weather, and it depends on altitude and all sorts of things. So there's a limitation in the hydraulic pressure that we can achieve using an exhauster. That's why large trucks don't use exhausters. They use compressed air. Now, whenever you've got compressed air, whenever you're actually compressing air using a piston, really there is no limit. The pressure can be really very, very high. That's why very large trucks, you need just only very light pressure on the brake pedal to bring about really quite dramatic braking. That's all I've got for you. I hope you enjoyed it.